I love a good history lesson. Without history and the knowledge of it, it can be tempting to say that we live in unprecedented times at the intersection of protests and a pandemic that disproportionately affects low income folks and people of color. It would be tempting, perhaps, without history, to say it is unprecedented to hear a president calling not for unity, but increased retaliation against those exercising their First Amendment rights. But as Everett laid out so clearly, there is nothing unprecedented about the dehumanization, suppression, and control of Black bodies and Black lives. And the liberation of Black folks is tied to the liberation of queer folks, Indigenous folks, and all marginalized communities who bear the burden of increased police and government surveillance and violence. The liberation of Black folks, queer folks, Indigenous folks is also tied to my liberation as a white person. I had planned to kick off our summer series on identity with a nice container to talk about our own personal identities, who we are, the stories we claim, and what we are here to do in the world. And although today's service has definitely been shaped more by current events than by my original plans, we are still talking about who we are, the stories we claim, and what we are here to do in the world. Some of us claim marginalized identities, and some of us recognize our identities carry with them a lot of privilege we did nothing to earn. Many of us, myself included, carry identities that fall on both sides of the spectrum of privilege and oppression. As a cisgender white person with probably more education than I really need, but I sure did enjoy getting it, I carry privilege in my skin. I speak privilege in my words and in the way I present myself to the world. As a queer woman, I also know the experience of being other, although I also know that my own experience pales in comparison to the fear carried by my siblings of color, particularly when interacting with police, with the economy, and with our society at large. All of which is to say that this movement and this moment matter to me, but they are not about me. They require me to take a back seat in terms of my own needs and follow the lead of those who are most directly affected. So what can I do? I imagine this is a question that everyone has been asking themselves. And I'm still asking myself. This is a thought process in process. Under normal circumstances, I could take my body into the streets, provide water, hand sanitizer, masks, use my privilege as protection for others. However, with the pandemic being what it is and my household containing people who are at high risk, that's not something I can do right now. I can offer financial support because of my economic privilege to Black Lives Matter and to other groups, as I've encouraged you to do today. I can educate myself on Black history, on the experiences of people of color, about the carceral state that preys on Black bodies for profit, just as surely as the systems of slavery did in a different century. I can educate myself on my own whiteness and in the ways that I've been programmed and socialized to make assumptions and have particular reactions. White is, of course, not my only identity, though I would argue it is the one with the biggest impact on how I move through the world. And for my fellow white folks, it is not your sole identity either, though I hope you will all continue to invest your time and energy into your own re-education. Just one example, we'll be starting a book discussion here at Northwoods for that purpose, and there are many other opportunities available. Resistance is required, but what that looks like is as varied as the human experience. Creative resistance can mean protecting your protesting neighbors from police actions designed to maximize confrontation. It can take the form of removing Confederate memorials that are long overdue for a tearing down. It looks like Black Lives Matter painted on the streets of DC, and it looks like white protesters standing between their Black and brown neighbors and the cops in riot gear preparing to do them harm. It can look like art. It can look like poetry. It can look like saying hello to the people on your street. It's hard to talk about identity and privilege without also talking about authority. Another identity that I carry in the world is that of a church pastor. You would be amazed how much clout you get by wearing one of these stoles or one of those nifty collars. And I've thought a lot about how I might wield that power in support of this movement and this moment. One way I do that is here with you, sharing the words and wisdom of Black voices and Black theology, which have inspired me. One of the ways that I can do this is to go out into my community and use that authority to ask difficult questions. Earlier this week, the UUA president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, wrote of her journey towards embracing the defunding and demilitarizing of the police force in this country. She writes, "The notion that these systems create safety is a lie of white supremacy, capitalism, and colonialism. Just as we witness in these present uprisings, it has always been designed to protect wealth and property, not life, and certainly not Black lives. We can't reform the current system of policing in America. We must find a new way to keep one another safe." This is also a position that I have come to hold, and one that I think could be transformative in our communities and around our country. What positions of power and authority do you hold? What expertise can you share freely? How does your particular life embrace the work of being actively anti-racist? Perhaps you have the ability to influence your company's hiring practices. Perhaps you are an educator who is still able to exert some control over what stories are told in your classroom. Perhaps you are a parent investing in raising children who will shape a better world than we know today. At the end of the day, what one person can do feels inadequate in shifting a system designed from the start to suppress and control some lives and protect the power of the powerful. But none of us are working alone, especially those of us engaged in religious community, even one like ours that still has its own work to do. And none of us will get it right, at least not all the time. I am certainly not a perfect ally, and I have chosen convenience over solidarity. And I have chosen to speak up when I didn't need to, or I chosen not to speak up when I needed to. But the commitment to being actively anti-racist is not about perfection. It is about getting better. May we be known by the company we keep, and may we continue to get better together. Thank you.
I invite you to join me in our closing song, which is We Shall Be Known. This will not be familiar to most of you, but it is simple and easy to catch on, so give it a try. Please keep